what is the number one cause of an underfunctioning thyroid? It's an autoimmune condition. And it's really kind of incredible because oftentimes standard of care doctors do not run TPO and thyroid globulin antibodies in them. And I had a conversation with a really well-renowned endocrinologist, and she was saying to me, it's like, look, it's because we wouldn't do anything differently with our care. And I was like, that makes sense. I don't want to run a test if it's not going to change my clinical outlook, right? I don't want to spend my patient's money doing that. But we would look at it and go, well, listen, if there's an autoimmune condition, yes, we want to care for your thyroid, but getting your TSH within normal limits and not addressing the autoimmune condition just allows that autoimmune condition to travel on down and wreak havoc elsewhere. And if it's a younger woman, it actually can go to another gland, like the ovaries, right? So then we're looking at like a real bona fide premature menopause that, unlike Hashimoto's thyroiditis, where you can actually run your antibodies towards thyroid, where your immune system gets a little confused and starts attacking that gland itself, we don't have one yet for the ovaries, but I've seen it clinically way too many times.
You inspire me to be the higher me. You're my inspiration to create.
שלום לכולם וברוכים הבאים לפודקאסט השראה להבראה. Welcome to my podcast Inspire to be higher.
Deep within, let your dreams begin.
Welcome to another episode of the podcast Inspire to be higher. Today, I'm thrilled to have with us Dr. Holly Lucille, an internationally respected naturopathic doctor and expert in natural health and hormone balance. Dr. Holly is a licensed naturopathic physician, an international lecturer, a natural health consultant, a TV and radio host, and the author of several books, including Creating and Maintaining Balance, A Woman's Guide to Safe Natural Hormone Health. Dr. Holly has appeared on major networks such as ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, the Dr. Oz Show, The Doctors, Lifetime, and the Discovery Health Channel. She serves on the editorial advisory boards of leading natural health journals and was recognized by Time magazine as one of the top 100 most influential people in the field of alternative medicine. She is a senior medical advisor to Fullscript and a past president of the California Naturopathic Doctors Association, where she helped lead efforts to license naturopathic doctors in the state of California. I've heard myself from naturopathic doctors who are admiring you for this. This is such an important move for so many people.
It was a huge team effort, I will tell you that. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. There was a lot of people that came before me that paved the road.
Okay. And Dr. Holly is also on the staff of the Beverly Hills Institute of Precision Medicine. Today, we'll dive deep with Dr. Holly into one of the most important topics in health, thyroid health. It is a big problem. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 10 men have low thyroid function, and it is super common, underdiagnosed, and potentially life-threatening. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. That you reading all that just kind of makes me feel tired.
It's your doing. So
I appreciate it, Cher. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, this is a very big, it's an important topic, especially to look at, through the lens of whole person care, right? We've been so used to in this, I think, with this topic, especially, and well, with other conditions, of seeing things being cared for or treated very reductionistically, right? So just kind of in a very narrow mindset, narrow scope of thinking, and especially with one of the number one prescribed medications still out there being synthetic T4 Synthroid. There's just so much more to thyroid metabolism and looking at somebody's thyroid health than that. And certainly than just the gold standard of the TSH, right? It's always baffled me that I've always thought, I graduated from naturopathic medical school in 2001, and I was having so much fun in my practice, and I was like, this isn't really rocket science, is kind of what I said to myself, and maybe I even said it out loud. And I was like, it's amazing to me, and the reason I said that is because if I could look at somebody and gather information and, maybe, remove obstacles to cure, right? So what if their diet was not that great, or if I knew that wheat or dairy or, was an issue, and we just would remove some things and their body would go ahead and just become better and stronger and them healthier. I'm like, this is so cool. And it's fun for me to see people get better because I think when we do better or we get better and we feel better, we do better. And we all need to be helping each other and doing better right now in this world. But then when it comes to the endocrine system, this is where I changed my tune a little bit. I was like, oh, the devil is in the details. There is really, in my opinion, no other system, internet in our body that's so complicated. It's our endocrine system. And I think it's a disservice when practitioners and people don't look at it very comprehensively. I live here what we call Beverly Hills adjacent, where actually I'm now under the Hollywood sign in Beechwood Canyon, but in Los Angeles. And for a long time, I would get a lot of patients from these, let's just say, quote unquote, hormone doctors that, in my opinion, were doing ready, fire, aim approach to hormone therapies, right? Or HRT or whatever you want to call it. For me, replacement, if somebody's in a natural phase of life, wasn't really an accurate term. There's nothing to replace because these hormones decline naturally, right? But are there imbalances due to our modern day? Sure. And I also not only ready, fire, aim, but I felt like it was like a sledgehammer approach. And then not taking into consideration like sex hormone binding globulin and the body being really intuitive and the brain being super smart and going, whoa, 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 you're 62 years old. That's a lot of hormones for you at this age. And so they bind them up and then the patient isn't getting better. So they go back and guess what? They get just a higher dose or a different delivery form. And so I do think that was a long-winded hello and thank you, but that's where I'm at.
That's great. And going into HRT, which is another topic that's very, very interesting. And yeah, I'm with you on the same page. But going back to the thyroid, what, in your opinion, is the most or are the most common reasons people are misdiagnosed or go underdiagnosed with thyroid dysfunction? And I've read that somewhere that 60% of the patients that are eventually diagnosed first don't know that they have a problem. They are misdiagnosed and they think
Yeah,
I'm a little tired, I have just mood swings, a little. They don't connect the dots. So why
yeah.
is that, do you think?
I think that's a great thing to point out. And part of the reason why it is because if you look at the signs and symptoms of an underfunctioning thyroid, okay, we won't, let's just, we'll take all diagnosis aside, like hypothyroidism, right? Or some people say, this also cracks me up, you have subclinical hypothyroidism. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure those clinical symptoms are not sub, they're very apparent that it's a thyroid issue. I would say sub-laboratory. But if you look at, I mean, I remember doing, I think it was a nationwide dinner tour about a decade, no, more than a decade ago. And I remember my slide deck, and it was on thyroid metabolism. And I think I had at least 6 slides filled with the signs and symptoms of an underfunctioning thyroid. And to answer your question, the problem is they very much overlap with a ton of other conditions. It could be a low iron hemoglobin hematocrit ferritin anemia issue. It could be dysbiotic candida overgrowth. When you think about metabolism in general, right? Because I think it's important at the top of the show to perhaps just remind people that each and every cell in our bodies, the aerobic and anaerobic metabolism is driven by the active thyroid hormone T3, right? So tyrosine is T, and 3 is the molecules of iodine that are able to get into that cell nucleus and connect to the receptor site and do like every hormone does, it delivers a message. And thyroid, at the end of the day, drives our aerobic and anaerobic metabolism of every single cell in our body. So if you just think about metabolism in general, I mean, the common symptoms we know of hypothyroidism or underfunctioning thyroid, or however we want to call it today, obviously fatigue, protracted fatigue, right? But also skin issues, not being constipated, a scalloped tongue. Uh, I could go on and on and on and on. Anywhere from rashes to brittle nails, right? So nutrient absorption, it just goes on and on and on. And I think the reason people don't connect the dots is because it could be anything. It could be clinically really anything. And I think that's where a proper differential diagnosis is important. When somebody just is like, Doc, I am not feeling great and I can't put my finger on it. I'm a little melancholy. My affect feels blunt. I don't have, my get up and go, got up and went. And I just like so. And so I think that's really important.
So let's talk about the diagnosis, the tests to run.
If we look at comprehensive thyroid care, right, we just know it goes way beyond just checking a TSH. And if you think about TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, where does that actually come from? Well, it comes from the pituitary gland. So I actually think it would be an incredible test to see if you had a pituitary adenoma or something like that. As far as assessing the real functionality of thyroid metabolism and thyroid hormone and all it does to get into those cells, I think it's kind of like a CYA test for a lot of us, right? It's like, well, it's gold standard and it's still in the literature, so we might as well run it. And certainly can tell us a little bit, right? But it fluctuates with things and it doesn't give us a whole picture, right? So I think we have to look at the entire thyroid cascade, right? So from the hypothalamic signaling to hormone conversion, I have to tell you, and we'll get there, right? But if you think about at the thyroid gland itself, this is where thyroid hormone is made. And T4 mostly, but I would take that back because I don't think we've ever identified a receptor site for T4. So I would call it a prohormone. I wouldn't even call it a hormone, okay? And so that conversion into active form of T3 and reverse T3, which I know we're going to get to, has to happen in our peripheral tissues. But there are several things in our modern day: elevated cortisol, depressed cortisol, alcohol use, insomnia, obesity, environmental toxins that will disrupt that conversion into T3. It's a conversion issue. Okay, so we have to look at that too. And so when we explore the why, right, the why of why the thyroid might be underperforming, we have to look at immune dysregulation, other chronic infections, definitely the stress response. That I think adrenal thyroid connection is very, very, very tight. Nutrient status. I don't know of another system. Well, all of our systems are pretty much nutrient dependent, I should say, but the thyroid for sure. And, if we think about selenium and zinc, and then we think about our compromised soil, especially with selenium, forget about it, right? So in whole person care, we're not just talking about, oh, your TSH is elevated, here's your synthroid. We have to look a lot deeper.
Great. Yeah, I love it. And speaking of selenium, can you talk a little about Brazil nut? What's going on with that? Because I've heard lately that we shouldn't touch them anymore. They're polluted, or what is it? I know sodium selenite now is preferable, but can you explain all of that?
It's true. And I think this is one of the things that is so important is to keep up on things, right? Because we always want to use food as medicine, right? And we always, in my opinion, want to use the least invasive methods to diagnose and treat first. And so we do think about food as, okay, well, if we need to recover something, what can we start there? Listen, right? So we think about using the least invasive methods to diagnose and treat. And so we think about, well, before throwing supplements at somebody, or not throwing them, but right. So because when people choose not the here, take this approach, which is standard of care, Western allopathic medicine. My parents were both pharmacists. I'm pretty well versed in it, right? So I think it's important to stay up on things. And so I think from what I've heard, and I've heard this too, Brazil nuts, right? So we used to see that they're really great because of
Selenium.
their very high content or high selenium content, right? And so one of the things that I think I've noticed in the research is that the toxicity, right? So selenium toxicity risk. And so one nut, if you think about it, can contain like 68 to 91 micrograms, and some of the nuts can go over 100 micrograms. So if you look at them, sometimes the recommended daily intake, it's so 4 to 6 Brazil nuts a day can kind of push somebody a little bit, right? So if you get too much selenium, you're looking at things that you don't even want because it's going to show up as selenium deficiency almost, right? Hair loss, nails being brittle, almost like a garlicky odor to their breath, right? Fatigue, GI, all of the things we're trying to care for. And so that's definitely one of the things that I've heard about this kind of step away from Brazil nuts. But you and I could probably talk about selenium supplements for an hour as well, right? So we think about selenium methionine, sodium selenite, in inorganic form of selenium, yes, has a little bit of lower absorption, right? Pro-oxidant in high doses, so not ideal in my opinion for long-term use. But again, there are ways to test, and that's I think is an important thing for us just to kind of move into, because we think about how dependent the thyroid is on on um, on nutrients, and so why not do a full thyroid panel that includes selenium, um, maybe zinc, vitamin D, iodine, probably from a urinary perspective. There's other things that I include when I think about a full thyroid panel. Obviously, TSH, we've talked about that, but free T4, free T3, and reverse T3. And what is the number one cause of an underfunctioning thyroid in this country that I'm in, right? The number one cause is what? It's an autoimmune condition, right? It's that Hashimoto's. And so TPO and thyroglobulin antibodies, and it's really kind of incredible because oftentimes standard of care doctors do not run them. And I had a conversation with a really well-renowned endocrinologist, and she was saying to me, it's like, look, it's because we wouldn't do anything differently with our care. And I was like, that makes sense. I don't want to run a test if it's not going to change my clinical outlook, right? I don't want to spend my patient's money doing that. But we would look at it and go, well, listen, if there's an autoimmune condition, yes, we want to care for your thyroid, but getting your TSH within normal limits and not addressing the autoimmune condition just allows that autoimmune condition to travel on down and wreak havoc elsewhere. And if it's a younger woman, it actually can go to another gland, like the ovaries, right? So then we're looking at like a real bona fide premature menopause that, unlike Hashimoto's thyroiditis, where you can actually run your antibodies towards thyroid, where your immune system gets a little confused and starts attacking that gland itself, we don't have one yet for the ovaries, but I've seen it clinically way too many times.
Okay, great. And have you seen clinically Hashimoto reversed? I mean, having the antibodies and then, taking off gluten, for instance, that we're aware of the connection with autoimmunity in general and thyroid, and getting these antibodies lower.
Yeah. That is the goal, my clinical goal, when we're looking at somebody that clinically presents with underfunctioning thyroid. 2, we discover that it's an autoimmune issue in nature. So symptom control obviously is primary because we don't want people to be miserable, but addressing the autoimmune condition is really close secondary. and super important because with Hashimoto's, the goal isn't just to replace thyroid hormone, right? And at times, and this is some of the education I need to use with some of my patients, that I don't want to ever take anything. And I'm like, well, the tissue that was responsible for making these hormones in the first place has been being attacked. And this means that it might mean that you need to be on a little bit of thyroid replacement. Now, that's where the word replacement would be utilized because this was an unnatural thing that happened and we should replace, that hormone. But our goal would be to calm the immune attack, right? So where do I go first for that? Well, where do we all go? Where that if you know, it's the gut, right? And then reducing that inflammation, managing stress, removing triggers like gluten for sure. I mean, I think that's the number one thing. And if somebody is only willing to do one thing that I say out of the bazillion that I ask them in this condition, it's please 100%, because that is in the literature. And I have seen cases whip around, especially in young kids, when we get them off of gluten, for sure. But optimizing vitamin D levels and then looking at those nutrients like selenium and myo-inositol can really be helpful, and then also support our regulatory immune system. But what I will tell you is that when I do a gut test on somebody with Hashimoto's, and I'm not going to say 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10, I'm going to say 10 out of 10 times they're missing complete phylums. They're just, I liken it to, it's like you living in Los Angeles without any Asian people, right? Period. They're missing the whole group. And we know that diversity index in the literature is linked to better health outcomes. And so we start working on that gut. And my number one clinical goal for this situation now is to get those antibodies down and help people feel. That's important too.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to always just treat lab tests. We got to care for people, but super important.
You were mentioning that taking off the gluten can be really helpful with the kids. And I was just recalling a case that with a young girl that had Hashimoto. It wasn't about her. She was not my patient. My patient was her mother. But what's interesting about this case is that the mother had the fibromyalgia, and we ran her test, and she had mold issues, and they left the home in order to renovate. And the girl, she was 8 years old. They were out of the home environment for a couple of months, and she recovered. The Hashimoto
It is
amazing. So it
That's
was
amazing.
just the environment.
Yes. Okay. And that's, mycotoxins are no joke, right? I mean, I think that just really needs to be highlighted because I think the people that are like, oh, everybody has been exposed to mold. Well, yeah, sure. We probably have in certain environments, in, different regions, probably more so. But it's almost like any other thing. When you point your finger out at it, there's three pointing back at you. How is your body processing it or not processing it? Can we detoxify? Can we, have a proper mycotoxin detox in general? What's our health like? What are our epigenetics, that can facilitate this process? Are we going to get into trouble because we're not as efficient as other people with that? And so, but you know what? That's such a great story. The other thing that I think these days, and I probably should put on my little blue blocking glasses right now, is too much blue light, right? So we've got all the screen. I've seen antibodies rise mostly and solely because of that.
Wow.
And these need to be cleaned, so I'm going to take them off. That's not good. I'll take a hit. But like I run my red light a lot when people are like, oh, you've got such a nice glow. And I'm like, it's not a sunburn. It's just I'm offsetting my blue light. Thank you so much. I am one of those people too. Like I just took a trip to Austin and I had to get to sleep really quick because they're 2 hours ahead of me and wake up the next morning very, very early. And that brain candy of television sort of calms my mind so I can do that. So I'm in this hotel room and this big, TV screen is just glaring at me. And I know that, but I'm like, yeah, I even, and I do the best I can with all the little hacks that we have, but it's still, I think, a big issue. So we're talking about environmental toxins that we can see and also that we cannot see.
Right, exactly. And speaking of a toxin that affects the thyroid very much, let's talk about the fluoride in the toothpaste.
So it's interesting, like if you look at the periodic table, right? So what is around fluoride? Did you have to did you have to memorize periodic table?
Yeah, the noble gas, all of them, yeah, but I don't remember right now where fluoride
I
is.
know. So here's the thing. It's funny because I think it was Einstein himself that said, please do not memorize anything that you can look up. And I'm like, I should have gone back to school and told people, I'm like, hey, I was told that if I can look this up, I don't need to memorize it, right?
Yeah.
But if
It
we look up
should
at,
be with the heavy metals probably, or where is it with?
well, so okay, so around fluoride in the I'm looking at it right now, so I'm just going to show you. I wish I could we maybe you could
Edit it in.
edit it in, yes, the periodic table. So around fluoride, you'll see, I'm looking at what is around it are other halogens,
Oh yeah.
and they are very prevalent in the environment. And so if you, and especially, okay, here we are, sorry.
It's close to the end. It's
Right, so
7.
fluorine
Yep.
is a halogen, chlorine is a halogen, bromine is a halogen, iodine is a halogen. And we could go on, but I'm going to stop there. So these are halogens, right? So if you remember the radioactiveness that came over from the earthquake and then subsequent tsunami in Japan, and what were we recommended to do here to protect our thyroid from
Iodine.
this? Right, the potassium iodine. And that is because if those receptor sites, right, are open, and let's say you're iodine deficient, well, then you're going to be sucking up these little things that are right next to you, right? Chlorine in our water, in our pools, etc. The agricultural community that's using bromide. I mean, if you're like processed bread and Mountain Dew, right? If anybody comes in and that's part of their diet, like I know they've probably got a thyroid issue just because of that. And so that's one of the things that is happening. And I think also that is why we're seeing thyroid cancer being on the rise, is because of that exact same thing.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
so it's a great point. It is 100% a great point to bring up because, and that's where, if we go back to iodine, which is super important, because obviously what active and inactive thyroid hormone is made of. But if people are iodine deficient, I like to understand that. And there's a great panel that you can do too to test all of them. Like I'm going to tell you the story about a woman, and I see people mostly remotely these days, right? So after the pandemic and all of that, that's just how I sorted. And so I get all the initial paperwork, and she popped on my HIPAA compliant video. And I am not kidding you, her thyroid was bigger than her entire head. I
Wow.
was like, oh, you're not kidding. You certainly, yes. So now the interesting thing is everything that you could think of from a differential diagnosis point was ruled out. And I'm like, so what I ran on her was the whole halogen panel. Like I want to see environmentally, does she have more? Now the only thing that came up remarkable with her is she is iodine deficient, right? And so we're going to have to address that, but she's got this sort of like thyroid goiter enlargement inflammation going on. And so I have to scratch my head a little bit and put on my sleuth hat to understand. If it keeps growing, it will definitely occlude her airway, which is the number one thing I'm worried about. So, but other than that, everything checks out. Like her thyroid, this is the thing, right? Don't just treat lab tests. You've got to treat people. If you just saw her lab tests, you'd be like, you're fine. What are you talking about? Not
Right.
that. Yeah. So anyways, I think I got us off on some sort of tangent there. Sorry
No,
about
but
that.
this is the juicy stuff, the real life cases. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Yeah, you're exactly. And so, yes. So I think we were talking about, so yes, 70% of the immune system, obviously a little bit more, I would say, in the gut. So super important. And the other thing I want to say while we're on this about the microbiome is that A portion of it being healthy does help that conversion from T4 to T3. And if not, you're going to miss that, as well as the other things that I mentioned, including some medications like beta blockers, right? Again, insomnia, obesity. My younger sister, she's on Synthroid, and I could go down and just like check. I'm like, she's not converting. So that's the other thing, right? Synthroid is synthetic T4. And it does have to be converted. And if it's a conversion issue that's causing the hypo underfunctioning thyroid in the first place, well, then what are we going to do? Right. And what happens? She goes to her doctor, she gets the pamphlet on losing weight, and then she increases her her Synthroid. Why? Because her TSH is still elevated. And so this is where the devil's in the details. We really have to nuance this thyroid situation.
Yeah, I was wondering, what do you think? Like, I have a patient that has been on the medication, on the synthetic thyroid hormone for so many years. I think she's 65 maybe, and she's been on it ever since she was 20 something. Is there even a chance to try and or to try and get the thyroid to produce its own hormone, or is it too late for someone like that?
So I would say it would depend on, is she on just like a synthetic T4?
Yes, I think she is. And she's been on other medications that, of course, like blood pressure medications and all of that, that we could
Sure.
drop with just nutrition, like a keto
Yeah.
diet. But
I think if we're looking, I mean, I would say the short answer is yes, and I'll I'll elaborate. If we're looking at whole person health, right? So I don't think it's like you are on thyroid hormone, so your thyroid is like, yeah, I don't need to do this anymore.
no,
Uh,
there is no
I got you covered. It means that if you address the body, right? So I would say top ones from a functional sort of foundational place, make sure the blood sugar is being balanced, right? How are they sleeping, or how have they been sleeping? Is that restorative? Is the liver, right, and detoxification pathways clear? Uh, Liver is partly where you are definitely converting that T4 to T3. Food triggers, we've mentioned gluten, of course, but for many other people, dairy and others are culprits, right? Common, like eggs, almonds, soy, etc. How is their parasympathetic? We talk about metabolic flexibility a lot with the Dr. Nasha circle and stuff. But I also think about parasympathetic flexibility too. It's like, how good are we at going from multiple stressors that we have in our modern day, and being able to go, okay, that was a lot, but now it's time. It's almost like when your phone battery goes down. Can you plug yourself in and recharge quickly? Like, that is my question for folks. And sometimes um, it's a no. It takes like a lot of time, and we can't even get there. And I think that's a big thing too.
For sure. Can you elaborate on this a little, just about the connection of to cortisol, the thyroid and cortisol?
Yeah.
And
So from my clinical experience and from the research, if you have elevated cortisol over a period of time, that is going to disrupt the conversion of T4 to T3. And then subsequently as well, if you have adrenal insufficiency, where you're kind of at that third stage where it's like, you could just see it in somebody's history, right? They had a catastrophic event, let's say 3 years ago. Then they got a divorce, and then everybody went through a pandemic, and then their child ended up with a chronic illness. Like, I mean, you can just see it. And they're really at that place where, like, I have nothing left, right? It's not a thriving perspective anymore. It's a survival for them. That in and of itself will stop that conversion from T4 to T3 too. So I think having the optimal cortisol level that sets that circadian rhythm, that diurnal variation of, I always joke when I go backpacking every year and I get out from the artificial lights and I get out from the blue lights we were talking about, and I'm like, oh, there's my circadian rhythm. I've missed you for a year now, right? Because it's like, Cortisol wakes you up in the morning and it allows you to go back to sleep at night. And, you know, a really common test that people are running a lot these days for any hormone, well, not any, but for, let's say, the steroidogenic pathway is the Dutch test, but it also gives you that nice sort of understanding of where that circadian rhythm is and where that diurnal variation of cortisol and DHEA take place. And it's important to be optimized if you are going to optimize your thyroid function as well.
So are you a fan of melatonin and as a supplement for that, or
Say
just
that again, I missed you.
melatonin to
Oh,
take?
so sure. I guess the other thing, not that this is about the Dutch test, but you will get some organic acid testing and understand. And so, yeah, melatonin, I think anything that's going to assist in sleeping, obviously at the doses that are appropriate for sleep. Melatonin is used for higher doses for antioxidant and immune regulation, you know, in other populations and such. But anything that's going to facilitate somebody being able to get to sleep and stay asleep is super important. I mean, it is a challenge in our modern day. I will say that for sure.
Yeah. So how do you approach Hashimoto or autoimmune thyroid issues differently than a standard hypothyroid?
Yeah, it's definitely that gut health. I mean, and reducing inflammation, managing the stress, removing triggers like the gluten and such. But that is a deeper dive. It's almost like a new diagnosis, right? It's not like underfunctioning hypothyroidism anymore. It's like you have an autoimmune condition, you know, we got to get in there. And so and then, you know, obviously using appropriate supplementation and nutrients like myo-inositol, selenium, black seed oil actually is in a very popular formulation right now called thyroid antibody support, I believe. And I've seen some really good responses to using that as well.
Okay. And regarding the foods that people immediately take off, like broccoli, what do you think? I mean, should people continue to eat them boiled, cooked, or
Okay, so yeah, I think you're talking about the idea, and once again, right? So we live in this area and where I think it's important to nuance things, especially my patients. I always, hopefully up front, because if it's not up front, it's definitely during part of our communication. I really encourage them. I actually mandate that if they ever want to ask me a question and they're like, I heard, or I read, or somebody told me, or, you know, I saw, I need to see the reference and I have to have context, because with social media and all of the platforms out there and the influencers, right? People are getting information from everywhere. And I think it's really our responsibility as practitioners to fact check, double check, and just like really, you know, I mean, I can't tell you the amount of people that I've had in the last 2 weeks say, I think I have a histamine and mast cell activation issue. And I'm like, where did you hear that?
Yeah,
I heard it on TikTok.
yeah,
Okay. I mean, sure, let's take it up. But do you know what I'm saying? Right.
yeah,
So
yeah.
what was your question? I'm
About
sorry.
broccoli and
Oh, okay, okay. So you're talking about so you know, your cruciferous vegetables,
yeah,
broccoli and cauliflower and kale and Brussels sprouts, right?
yeah,
So in my opinion, and I'll say this clinically, I've had one case my entire 22, 23 years of doing this where I thought it was an issue. And it was somebody who was driving for a living, okay? And they were health nuts. And so they had a bag of raw broccoli in their passenger side seat and they would eat it like somebody else would eat chips, right? So my joke is that honestly, in a raw form, I think you're going to have social issues before you have thyroid issues with this family of foods. But you're right. I think a nice steam, right? Or a slow cook, parboiling these particular goitrogenic foods, it has never given people a problem. There's so much more. I'd rather like one of the things that I do get people started, and I don't know, some of your listeners might roll their eyes at me, but I will tell you, unless and until I can get some maybe food allergy testing run. So it's fairly expensive, right? Especially if you're going to be comprehensive and not just do a small panel. whether it's a delayed food sensitivity reaction, IgG or IgA, irritating to that gut lining, etc. I will actually have them follow a kind of a modified blood type diet. And just, I know it's still like, okay, you take the entire population and break it down into 4 subgroups, but it's still, and Dr. Diadamo has this app out there. I think it's $3.99 once, not every month. And I just have them avoid their avoid foods unless and until we can get, and that, in my opinion, it's inexpensive, it's helpful because from his data and his dad's data, but also, again, from seeing it clinically, I do think that it helps remove the foods that are somewhat inflammatory and might be causing issues from an immune system perspective. So it's just a little bridge to help me get to where I'm going to. If they don't have the means to actually run a larger panel of food triggers for them.
Like, do you use the
You know,
Vibrant America?
Vibrant America. Okay, so Vibrant America came out when I was well into practicing. And here's the thing about that, and most people probably will recognize this. And when you're just like pumping along, in order to have a new something come into your practice, it's a lot. You have to you're like, I already know this, I already know this company, I know the customer service, I know the way to go. So it's like, so Vibrant America is a great lab. Their methodology is amazing. And there's a lot of other labs out there that will do these types of testing, right? Genova does, US Biotech, which I think is Mosaic at this point in time. I think it's all who you are used to working with, right? And I feel badly for those sales reps that have to come in and try to, play a mean game of Red Rover, like Red Rover, let Holly come over, because it takes a little bit of swindling on their part for me to actually budge, because I've already got stuff down, right?
Yeah.
And any disruption kind of is like a disruption for my practice. So it's not as automated anymore. And that's more time for me, less time for my patients. And I don't like that. So
Yeah. Okay.
that's a great, Vibrant America is a great lab.
Okay. Okay, great. So can you give us how you see how your vision is of this whole issue, like something to summarize, and also tips that you have, like.
Yeah, I mean, so for in general, when we're talking about thyroid, look, I don't know how it is for you, but people come in and it's my job to have good clinical acumen, right? Meaning, like, I really want to listen and think about what people are saying and what they're presenting with. And if they've been diagnosed is one thing, right? So I see it maybe on their labs, or I know that they, have elevated antibodies. So we can just start working. And with an antibody situation that is the contributing cause to underfunctioning thyroid, yes, we want to give thyroid support, but we want to identify and treat the cause, and also then get into that immune system dysregulation. That is primary. When we think about just generally suboptimal thyroid function, and probably sub laboratory, because the labs are not showing it, but the clinical situation is, then you go down that list of sleep and stress and nutrients like vitamin D. And then I think, one of the things that from a, I just use, I'll go over maybe a summary of like selenium and myo-inositol I've talked about. And those have been shown to reduce TPO antibodies as well. Ashwagandha or rhodiola, also for rhodiola, especially for that adrenal thyroid synergy, I love.
Yeah.
If we're looking at, I mean, I've been hard pressed to find a tyrosine deficiency, but for thyroid hormones synthesis, that could be put on board. Also, N-acetylcysteine or milk thistle for like liver support. I think that's important. And also other glandulars or adaptogens based on the case by case. But I start with food, stress, and then gut health. That's where I begin.
Great. Excellent. So
Yeah,
just one last thing.
sure.
I always ask all my patients, all my guests.
I can be your patient, I promise. It'll work out well.
Because this is called Inspire to be Higher. This is what we want to achieve. So what is your inspiration? And also, what is the inspiration you want to give to others?
This is a great question. I'm used to doing these interviews and people do that rapid fire questioning at the end where you can't really think about it and you have to just spit out something. But this is easy for me. So my inspiration is honestly for people to feel good. I have this tattoo on my arm. It says eudaimonia. And eudaimonia is a word that I stumbled across when I was getting ready to present. I think it was for the naturopathic NMSA, the Naturopathic Medical Student Association. Yeah, NMSA, all of our acronyms. And they had asked me to deliver my title of my presentation because I think it was for marketing stuff. And I didn't know what I was going to present on, so I made something up. And I think it was something like being a healthy person, having a healthy practice, something like that. Okay. So then it came time for me to build my presentation. And I was like, did I submit that? What the heck was I thinking? I didn't know what I was thinking. Like, what does this mean? So then I decided to look up the word healthy. Like, what does healthy mean? Oh my gosh, I was so underwhelmed with any definition because it was very black and white. You're either healthy or not. You have good cholesterol or not. And that's where I stumbled upon eudaimonia. And eudaimonia, for like euthyroid or euphoria, is good, right? So, and daimonia is spirit. So what it said it meant was humans flourishing, right? Good spirit. And I just, as a bona fide Aquarian, I really do love that. That is my inspiration. And so, and I really do feel like when people feel better, they do better, right? They're more generous towards others. There is that real chance to act locally, to even to influence your partner or your family, and then to ripple affect it globally. And when people are not feeling well, I mean, I know that myself. If I'm tired, if I'm grumpy, I mean, I'm the first person that's going to start a fight, right? Well, because it's just so my inspiration really is to just be a partner and people feeling great and being and feeling hopeful, because I think that makes a difference in the world. And if that's my part that I can do, I love that.
I love that too. It's beautifully said. And I think that this whole interview gives so much value to people that will hear it, to my audience. I'm so thankful for all of it. And I loved meeting you. You're just beaming. And yeah, thank you so
Well,
much.
I appreciate your touch points and reaching out to me, and that we had the chance internationally to do this, right? Because you are where?
Israel.
In Israel. And
Yes.
I'm here in Los Angeles. So how
Yeah.
fun. And I appreciate it so much.
Small
Thank
world.
you.
Yeah, we were all on
We're all
this.
connected. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
תודה שהייתם איתנו עד סוף הפרק. אני מקווה שמצאתם השראה בתוכן של היום. אם נהניתם, אני מבקשת שתשתפו את הפרק הזה אפילו רק עם בן אדם אחד. כך נוכל להפיץ יותר תקווה, ריפוי ושינוי חיובי בעולם. למידע נוסף אתם מוזמנים לבקר באתר שלי shiramed.com. תודה, וניפגש בפרק הבא.